So my story begins, of course, when I was born. But the process that I went through as I was growing up was I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to have it all together. I wanted to be the perfect child that anybody could ever have. And as I grew up doing that, when I saw other people who were not that way, who were not perfect, my heart would become hardened towards them. And I would often find myself judging them, and often find myself, even in friendships, I would lose friendships because I was looking at them and seeing all of their imperfections and saying, I need to surround myself with good friends, and so I can't have you as a friend. There was a switch that happened, and it was after I knew Jesus. It was after I'd been walking with him for a while, and it even led up to this last year. And God has been calling me out over and over again and asking me to walk with him and walk in grace. And so I've been learning how to do that. It started my senior year of high school, and I was friends with a girl, and she, at one point, I disapproved of something that she was doing, and at one point she sat me down and looked at me and said, Annie Rose, when I'm with you, I feel shamed. And to have a friend that would say that just is a really good friendship, but man, did it ever hurt me. As I went through that process of figuring out, wow, like I've shamed my friend, I realized that it has led back to a root of unforgiveness. When somebody would mess up, I would hold that in my heart for a long time. And that in particular has happened with my father over and over again. When he would mess up, I would hang on to the things that he did, and I would say in my heart that I was going to hold on to it and not let him have any relationship with me. I wasn't going to go back into loving him and letting him love me. So I started to try and learn, what does it mean to forgive? I know Jesus forgave me. I felt that forgiveness, but what does it mean? And man, so I started to say it out loud. I would say, okay, I forgive my dad. I forgive my dad. I forgive my dad. And I just kept saying it out loud, and it just didn't work. And I was like, why is this not working? I'm so frustrated. And every time I would interact with him, that bitterness would come up again, and I would react in anger, even if he wasn't doing anything wrong towards me. So yeah, this past year, I went on a trip called the World Race, and I traveled to 11 countries in 11 months. And in that process, God wrecked me. And I lived with people, I lived with a team for 11 months straight. And living day in and day out with people that way is, you have to learn how to forgive. And I didn't know how to forgive. And it was showing as I was interacting with my teammates. I remember sitting in Malaysia. We were sitting in this room, and I'm sitting with my team, and it was one of those nights that was like, man, things have been going wrong for a long time, and we haven't talked about it, so let's talk about it. All of it, right now. So I'm sitting there, and I had been talking about my dad and how it was, I just didn't know how to forgive him and all of this, and in a sense of, I didn't know how to walk back into a relationship with him, and I wanted to, but I just couldn't. And so I'm sitting there, and my teammate has her eyes closed, and she's just sitting there. And I'm like, you can leave. Like, if this is overwhelming, you can leave. And she looked at me, and she said, nope, God's talking to me. And I said, okay. So I finished my conversation, this conflict that I was having with this guy, and then she said, okay, it's time. And she looked at me, and she said, you know what, Annie Rose? God has incredible giftings for you. He has big things for your life. But if you don't learn how to forgive your dad, if you don't walk in forgiving your dad, you are never going to get those giftings. And I felt at that moment that I had reached the end of me. I didn't know how to forgive my dad. I'd been speaking it over and over, I forgive him, I forgive him. And yet it wasn't happening, and I knew in my heart that bitterness hadn't left. And so when she said that, I was like, well, how do I do this? And so we ended our crazy meeting, and I am now laying on the floor, face forward, crying because I don't know how to forgive my dad. And I am just like, God, I don't know how to do this. I've reached the end of me. I don't know what you want. And one of my teammates who had been struggling with forgiveness as well, he said, you know what? I'm going to write a forgiveness letter to my sister if anyone wants to join me. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, that's what I can do. I can, in obedience, write a letter to my Father that says, I forgive you. Not only do I forgive you, I'm asking for forgiveness because I have held bitterness in my heart towards you, and I have treated you in ways that you did not deserve to be treated. It was probably one of the most humbling things I've ever done. And when I was done, there was something about declaring forgiveness to my Father that broke that bitterness off. And it doesn't mean that it happened and then that was it. It meant I can point now to that moment in my life and I can say, I have forgiven my Father once, I can forgive him again. And so any moment when that bitterness tries to creep up inside of my heart, I have learned how to say, I forgive him. He is freed. I release him back to you, God. And so it's been quite a process since then, and to see how my relationships changed with my teammates after that, it was slow, but it was beautiful, because instead of holding grudges against them and condemning them, I was learning how to say, you know what, you are accountable to God, I am accountable to God, and I don't want to hang on to this. And so I quickly am learning how to release, and it's not always easy. There's moments I think that I'm going to fall apart because I deserve to have my rights and I deserve to be treated a certain way, and yet as I release that, I find there's a greater peace, there's a greater joy that I have in my life and in my relationships with others than I've ever had before. And so that is a story of how I learned how to forgive. My name is Annie Rose Taylor, and I'm from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I graduated from NMSU in December of 2009.